Have you ever looked in the mirror and wondered, where did I get that nose? Or maybe you've got your mom's laugh. Well, it turns out that's not just a coincidence. It's all part of a precise code, a recipe written deep inside your DNA. And today, we're going to unpack the simple, fundamental rules that put that recipe together.
So here's the game plan. We'll kick things off with the basics of how you get your genes, then we'll jump back in time to meet the monk who literally wrote the rule book on genetics with just a bunch of pea plants. From there, we'll see exactly how your sex is determined, why some traits show up more in men, and finally, bring it all back to see how this affects you today.
All right, let's dive right in with a question that I'm sure every single one of us has asked at some point.
You know the feeling, right? You look at old family photos and you see this incredible mix and match of features. It's fascinating, but this isn't some random lottery. No, there's a process behind it, a scientific one, that has been playing out for as long as there have been families.
And there's a name for this whole process: inheritance. It's the absolute heart of heredity. You can think of it like a biological highway that carries traits from your parents to you, and from them to their parents, and so on. But how does that highway actually work? Well, for that, we need to meet the guy who first drew the map. So let's go back to the source, to a quiet monastery garden and a monk named Gregor Mendel, whose brilliant work with something as simple as pea plants laid the foundation for pretty much all of modern genetics.
For 7 years, back in the mid-1800s, Mendel was just meticulously breeding thousands and thousands of pea plants. But here's the wild part. He published his incredible findings and crickets. The paper was completely ignored for 35 years. It wasn't until 1900 that the world finally caught up and scientists realized his work was the key to understanding how traits are passed down through chromosomes.
And this is where you can really see Mendel's genius at work. See, back then, most people thought traits just blended together, like mixing paint. But Mendel was smart. He focused on these 7 simple either-or traits. The plant was either tall or short. The seed was either round or wrinkled. There was no in-between. And by doing that, he proved inheritance isn't a blend at all. It's made of distinct little packets of information we now call genes.
Now check this out, because this is where it all clicked. He crossed a pure tall plant with a pure dwarf plant. What happened? Every single one of the baby plants was tall. The dwarf trait just vanished. But then, and this is the amazing part, he bred those plants together and bam, the dwarf trait popped right back up in a super precise 3-to-1 ratio. This was proof that the trait wasn't gone, it was just hiding.
So this disappearing act led Mendel to a really critical idea. There's the genotype, which is the actual genetic recipe. You know, the letters like TT or TT. And then there's the phenotype, which is the final dish, which you can actually see like a tall plant. And as he discovered, you could have 2 different genotypes, TT and TT, that cooked up the exact same tall phenotype.
And this is how that hiding works. He figured out that some versions of a gene, we call them alleles now, are dominant. The tall allele is a bit of a bully. It only needs 1 copy to show up. Others, like the dwarf allele, are recessive. They're a bit shy. You need 2 copies of that one for it to be expressed. It's a simple, elegant rule that perfectly explained his 3-to-1 results.
Okay, so now that we've got Mendel's rules down, let's use them to tackle one of the most fundamental traits of all, our biological sex.
In humans, it all comes down to a specific pair of chromosomes. Females have 2 X chromosomes, so XX. That means every single egg they produce carries 1 X chromosome. No other option. Males, on the other hand, are XY, so their sperm is a 50-50 toss-up. Half will carry an X, and the other half will carry a Y. So let's be super clear about this. Since the egg always brings an X to the party, the sex of the child comes down to one thing: which type of sperm gets there first. If a sperm carrying a Y chromosome wins the race, you get an XY combo, a boy. If an X carrying sperm wins, you get an XX combo, a girl. It's that simple. The genetic contribution from the male is what decides it. And look, this isn't just a fun science fact. It has some really serious social importance. For centuries, in many cultures, women have been blamed if they didn't produce male heirs. But understanding the basic biology makes it crystal clear that this is based on a complete and total falsehood. All right, now it's about to get even more interesting, because those sex chromosomes, the X and the Y, they don't just determine sex, they're also carrying genes for a whole bunch of other traits.
We call these sex-linked traits, and a lot of them, including common things like red-green color blindness and the bleeding disorder hemophilia, happen to be recessive traits located on the X chromosome. And this leads to a really specific and interesting pattern of how they're passed down.
This chart shows you exactly why. A male only gets one X chromosome, which he always gets from his mother. So if that one X has the recessive gene for colorblindness on it, like you see in that bottom right square, that's it. He'll be colorblind. But a female has two X chromosomes. So for her to be colorblind, she needs to inherit the recessive gene on both of them. She can be a carrier, as you see with the mother here, passing the trait on without having it herself. It's that simple difference that explains why these X-linked conditions are so much more common in men.
So, from Mendel's humble peas to the complex dance of our sex chromosomes, these basic principles have completely paved the way for the incredible genetic revolution that we are all living through right now.
So why does any of this old-school pea science still matter? Well, it matters a ton. When genetic counselors help a family understand their risk for a disorder, they're using these exact principles. This knowledge is the absolute bedrock of modern medicine and genomics, allowing us to develop treatments that are tailored to your specific genetic code. It all started in that garden.
And that brings us to one last really big question. Our ability to read, to understand, and even to edit our own genetic blueprint is advancing at an unbelievable speed. The science is moving faster than ever. So the question isn't just, what can we do with this knowledge anymore? It's, what should we do? And that's something for all of us to think about.